On this episode of the Bigwater podcast, we have Matt Markey of the Toledo Blade, a longtime sports writer turned outdoor writer about 12 or 13 years ago. He has a lot of awesome good stories as well, a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We talk about some of the poaching, different scandals, and things that he's been involved with through his time working with the Toledo Blade and then as a freelance writer. Producer dude, another day, another podcast. I'm not going to ask you if you like them because I do every time, and then you say the same thing. But we've got a guy that you actually have a little bit of a working relationship with coming up.
I do. We both worked in this for the same parent company back for a long time, actually, and we've crossed paths with Matt, our guest, throughout my producing of television shows and having him as a guest on some of the shows that I produced prior to working with you.
And so, yeah, the position he now has was held by a guy who's been on our podcast, one of our first couple podcasts, if I remember correctly, Steve Pollock, kind of a legendary outdoor writer. And Matt Markey's our guest today, and he took over that position. And we're going to talk about outdoor writing. We're going to talk about some stories. We're going to talk about a lot of things. You know, when you get these guys, they're almost professional storytellers. You know, that's kind of what they literally do. So I'm interested to see where this goes, and definitely chime in because I know this is your neck of the woods here too.
Yeah, it is literally what he does. He is a storyteller. So
let's bring Matt in before he leaves us. Matt Markey, welcome to the Bigwater podcast. This has been in the works. I always say this, but we've always, we talk to people for a long time, it seems like, before we actually either get together with schedules or shooting or whatever it is, but we're glad to have you on finally.
Thanks. I think the first time we talked about this might have been at the boat show in Cleveland 2 or 3 years ago. So I was assuming that you had maybe 207 more important guests.
No, 204 actually. 204.
Okay.
It's in all seriousness, like picking people. I kind of marched my own beat a little bit, but trying to, pick people that everybody has an interesting story to tell.
Sure.
The people that have an interesting story, the best ones usually don't think they do, or they're not willing to be honest. That's the biggest thing. Like with fishermen, it's not being honest. You see these people that come on, and that's why I definitely wanted to have you on, because you're basically a professional storyteller, and people, when we're kids, that's a bad thing. Like you're a storyteller. Right. That's a nice way of saying you're a liar. Right. But, doing what you do, you're a storyteller and you meet people. And I think that's the reason that, aside from, me working with you in the past and present really too, is just getting to hear some of that behind the scenes stuff. Because as much as we have seen maybe in the pages of the Blade, if somebody, recognizes your name before we even give you a formal introduction, that's what you do. You're telling things, but yet there's a lot that gets left off the page. Am I wrong?
There's quite a bit that gets left off, but you're right about the storytelling part, and that's what I've always enjoyed about newspaper work. It doesn't necessarily have to be a subject that I'm thrilled about. The people are always interesting, and so it's telling their story. And a lot of times, I'll write a story, and people will write in and say, thank you, that was a great story about. I said, no, it's your story. All I did was just arrange the words. And I think, the same thing happens when you interview people. You're just trying to get them to relay the story. And sometimes you have to kind of lead them along and ask the right questions and so on. But on some of your podcasts, I've seen you, just kind of slowly pull it out of them, and that's what we do. We want people to tell their story. Sometimes we have to, entice them to do that.
People, a producer dude always says, don't ask the same question 10 times. And I'm like, I do it in a different way because, especially when you know, you know what I mean? When behind the scenes something, and we're never trying to like embarrass somebody, and we're not trying to get like nitty gritty. This is not TMZ.
Right.
But I think a lot of guys are really reluctant, or they don't. And this is, I would imagine you're way more professional at this than myself, but you're always trying to pull something out of somebody that is interesting, but they don't think is.
Exactly. That happens very often. And a lot of times I won't ask that question initially. I'll try to, basically get them comfortable first. And then, so when I interview people, I never pull out a tape recorder or anything right away, because I think it kind of locks people up. And so I wouldn't ask them, the hard hitting or the home run question right out of the gate. I think it's better to get their comfort level at the right place. And then it becomes more conversational. It's not like you're interviewing them or they're on the stand giving testimony and you're cross-examining them. You want it to be more conversational. And I think those turn out to be the best interviews, is once they relax and they understand that it's just two people sitting here having a conversation. That's where you get the best material.
We had, I know producer dude's going to chime in here and disagree slightly, but we had Al Linder on the podcast, which is a childhood hero, an adult hero. Like, I mean, he's made things. There's a lot of people that have jobs because of Al Linder in the fishing business. I'm probably one of them, indirectly and directly as well. And it was just funny because when we got done with that, he was like, man, that guy is really good. And I'm like, he meant from a conversation standpoint and everything. And he, he's not a fishing guy, right? But he knew about Al, but I don't think he even understood he was like the Michael Jordan and LeBron and everything put together. Right. And it was just kind of funny because when you have somebody like him, he's our litmus test producer dude, where, he's not a fisherman, but he's been a producer and been doing stuff like this for a very long time. And when you kind of put that person in there, whether we're talking about cosmetics, handbags, or whatever, like you see, like, hey, this person has it, even like to your point, like even if you're not interested in that topic.
Right. And Al certainly is a storyteller. He can spin a yarn with the best of them. He's a unicorn. How about that? He's a unicorn. So backing up a little bit. So people that don't know, you are the outdoor writer for the Toledo Blade, and you've had that for like 12 years or so. Right. And unfortunately, that you can correct me exactly what the title is. Unfortunately, I think you're the last standing man. Is that true? I think I'm the last man on the island. What happened is when the newspaper business started to contract, they decided a lot of places to cut out the specialty writers. So newspapers that might have had a food editor or a religion editor or a travel editor and an outdoors editor, those were the first positions that were cut. And so as of about, I think 8 years ago, I'm the last full-time outdoors only daily newspaper writer in the state. So the other newspapers all use stringers or wire services. Some of them run, our stuff. And it's unfortunate because although it is a niche, in the newspaper, there are a lot of folks that still tell me they pick up the paper and that's the first thing they read. They want to read what the outdoors column says or what's in there today, or they read the sports first and then they back up and they go to the news. And there are still a lot of people in the state that write about the outdoors, but I'm the only one that's a full-time daily newspaper writer.
And you were a beat writer, right? Ohio State and that sort of thing. Like, what was that transition like, moving over from? And why did you do it? I guess if this is something that was going away and you're the last man standing, why did you make that move?
Well, I was a beat writer for many years, but I was also the only person in the building who could edit and understand Steve Pollock's copy, and that was because I was writing a weekly outdoors column for the Tiffin newspaper. I wrote outdoors for the Bowling Green paper, for a number of magazines and so on. And so I had a foundation and an interest in that. And so I had covered I was a Bowling Green beat writer for a few years, got to introduce the world to a young coach no one ever heard of named Urban Meyer. I was the UT beat writer for a number of years, got to cover that nasty point shaving scandal when I was on the beat there. And then I did Ohio State football for, I think about eight or 9 years. So I covered part of most of the Tressel era and then the Luke Fickell year. And then when Steve decided to retire, he had given me a heads up several months earlier and said, would you be interested? And I said, absolutely, because that's always been my first love. I've always been a sports guy and played a lot of sports and interested in sports, but the outdoors and hunting and fishing, with my dad, that was always my first love. And I continued, to write on a freelance basis for different publications as on the outdoors. And so when Pollock was going to retire, I said, absolutely, I'm interested. And most of the people said, you're leaving the Ohio State football beat, where you go to a bowl game every year, you travel all over the country with the team and so on. And then you're going to go write about, smelly guys going fishing. And I said, yes, that's what I want to do. And so I went to Jacksonville and covered the Ohio State game against, I believe they played Florida in the Gator Bowl, Luke Fickell's last game as the interim head coach. And then the next day I drove to the Everglades and I was the outdoors editor. That's how the transition started. And it was actually a good thing in a number of ways, because I was doing the thing I really loved. And so I think Steve felt comfortable kind of passing the baton to somebody he knew and was, comfortable with. And also over the years, when the Urban Meyer was here, his wife and his girls became good friends with my wife and my daughters. And so we visited him in Utah when he was there, in Florida when he was there. And I became friends with him as two dads, not a writer and a coach. I became friends with him as, just two dads talking about our kids. And so when he took over at Ohio State, I wouldn't have been comfortable covering them as a beat writer because of what I knew about, things that were personal that we shared and conversations and all. And so it was the perfect transition for me, to leave the Gator Bowl and the next day be in the Everglades talking about invasive species. So it was quite a jump, but you're right. To this day, people think I'm crazy for leaving Ohio State football and going to the outdoors. I don't. It was one of the best career choices I've ever made.
I mean, you opened the door, so I'm going to go there with Pollock. We had him on the podcast, and he is made. I'm not going to say he's not Al Linder-esque with his storytelling, but he has got he's got some travels. I mean, producer, do you remember standing on a toilet in like Zimbabwe or something? Because
running from the guys with machine guns or something.
Yeah. Let's just say there's going to be a part 2 with him. I would imagine at some point. But I just think about my dad used to rent or have a lease for duck hunting on the same island that Luke Lure did on Maumee Bay, and there's all kinds of stories with that, and my grandpa and stuff. And I can just remember them talking about who's this new guy coming in, and referring to Pollock because Luke had that position for 30 years. And even if it's like that in fishing, if I say something, somebody says, "Oh, okay," where if the neighbor says it, they're like, "Oh, that's BS." And I'm sure it was that same thing a little bit with you, or maybe even if it was only just in your own mind where you're like, "Man, I got some big shoes to fill here," and people, whether you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, I guess is the point. No matter what you write or do, Steve could write something and you put your name on it and someone would be like, "Oh, that's shit. That's not like Steve would have done."
That's right. I mean? People got very comfortable with Steve and with his unique style and so on. And so when I took over, I heard a lot of that, well, you're never going to be Steve Pollock. I never intended to be Steve Pollock because the guy's been a friend of mine for 30 years and I respect him a great deal. And we're different. He's primarily a hunter who fishes. I'm primarily a fisherman who hunts. And I think there are a lot of other, subtle differences and so on. But there were several years of that, Ross, where, you're not Steve Pollock, and then I would remind them, I'm not trying to be, I'm not claiming to be, and Steve wasn't Lou Kluwer, and Lou Kluwer wasn't Lou Campbell, who preceded him for 30 some years. And so I think it took a while, but then a number of people came around and said, you're okay. And okay was good enough for me because, as I said, my respect and friendship with Steve, was I wanted to honor what he had established, but also not try to mimic, the way that he wrote or the way that he did things. And I always kid him that, he had these great stories about Czechoslovakia and Antarctica and Africa and so on. And people ask me, well, where are you going? I said, well, Pollock spent all the money in the budget. So there's, if I go to the Everglades and the UP, that's the big trip for the year. But no, that did happen. You can't replace Vince Lombardi, and I didn't try.
Well, and that's not a writer thing, right? That's just a life thing. I mean, football coaches are a prime example, or anything where someone is admiring or observing, listening to someone on a regular basis, radio, talk show. It doesn't matter what it is. Right. Maybe even a ginger-headed captain that does a little bit of fishing stuff here in videos.
Right.
But
they get comfortable, and that's who they're used to. And if you become, I think Steve kind of became a pseudo member of the family for a lot of people over that 30 years.
Yeah, I think the only thing that if I'm sitting in your shoes, the only thing that's got to suck, if you're being brutally honest, would be, because what you're going to get past that period, it just is what it is. Like or you're moving on or whatever. But I think the thing that would suck though is when you see, because again, like you said, looking at his copy for how many years, that doing that travel stuff, there's got to be a little bit of like, man, I wish we could do that again.
Absolutely, there sure is, because I see we have a lot of great stories right here in our backyard. And then in our region, the Great Lakes region, we have a lot as well. But then I see stories beyond, so many interesting places. Now, they did send me about 5 years ago, they wanted like a 3 or 4 part series on what is the real impact of, the changing climate, what evidence is. So I went to New England to look at the forests up there and interview some folks about how the forests have changed. I went to the Bay of Fundy, which is off of Maine, which has the incredible lobster fishery and a great cod fishery. And it also has the most extreme tides anywhere in the world. So you'll see pictures of big fishing boats floating and tied at the dock. And then 8 hours later, they're sitting in the mud. And then 8 hours later, they're back up on top. So I went there, and then I went through the maritime provinces and out to Prince Edward Island. And then there's a small island off there called Lennox Island. There's a native tribe there. And anyways, the way the tide and the ocean level has changed, it's washing their historical burial ground into the ocean. So it's wearing away at the hillside. So that was a good trip. That was about 10 days, and through upstate New York into New England and into Nova Scotia and out to Prince Edward Island. But other than that, I haven't done anything, that was the only one that required a passport, let me say. So Pollock had a lot of stamps on his passport. I don't have nearly as many.
Well, it's just a different world, right? I mean, do you think the digital thing is to blame for that because of ultimately money, because people maybe aren't buying as many newspapers or advertising in that?
Well, that's the root of all of it, is that the newspaper business has contracted, and advertising is it's like sharks feeding or something, people fighting for the advertising dollar. And if we had the same financial position that we did 20, 25 years ago, I'd be going all over the world too. But, it's okay, because I've never had a day, Ross, where I woke up and said, boy, I've got nothing to write about. That's not going to happen. I could do this job for 100 years, and I don't think that would ever happen, because there are so many interesting people and interesting stories in this area that are related to the outdoors. And the outdoors, in my definition, has never been, me and Joe got a couple of 6-packs and went fishing. It's wildlife, it's ecosystems, it's all kinds of different things. People that go to the Lake Erie Islands strictly to look for birds or to camp, or that there's just so many things that fall under that outdoors umbrella that I'd never run out of stories.
See, that surprises me, just because, again, what I do is not definitely what you do, and we're we're not going to win any Hemingway awards here. But I write like a monthly column for In Fisherman, and that's changed because with the print stuff, where it used to be 2,000, 2,500 word, features, if you will, more in depth, and now we're into those like 7 best walleye lures. Give me 600 words and 10 pictures, galleries and all these things that are more digital focused. But even with that said, I've at this point, I'm probably into the thousands of print things that I've done, or digital pieces. But I can't imagine, that's over 20 some years when you're doing averaging 3 a week?
3 a week. And then I get a full page 1 day a month.
And so, I mean, just, how do you go about deciding like, hey, we're going to talk about the birds today? I mean, are these things that you plan way out? Because I'm a planner personally, but you can at some point, to stay relevant, can only plan things so far when things happen. So give me that process on how you do some of those things, or is it people just kind of, emailing you in to, notify you to things, or, sometimes I'll obviously send you a note.
I try to do it. I try to plan. I'm a planner too, but I also have to make that plan very flexible because things do happen that are, news or somewhat breaking news, and you have to adjust for those things. And I also try to balance it where, and if it's seasonal, so there'll be a lot of stories about hunting, but there's also stories now about walleye fishing because of the tournaments going on and the phenomenal fall fishing. And then I also get a lot of input from, the MDNR, ODNR, national wildlife organizations and so on. You kind of sort through all that, but I'm looking for a balance to try to cover a number of different interests, but also trying to match things up with the season and what's important at that particular time. And I like to do, educational or informational things, a couple times a month. So we're not always telling a story. Maybe we're talking to, Travis Hartman and asking him, well, why are the walleye here at this time of year?
He doesn't know. He's boring.
Why are people catching them, casting from shore in the snow in November, but you can't necessarily do that, in June or July. And those stories I enjoy. But again, the story would be about fishing from the shore in the fall, but also there's some Travis Hartman perspective and personality in there, and then some of the individuals to do that. But you always have to be ready. In my position, you probably don't deal with this, nearly as much, but for breaking news, because I had something planned, a few weeks ago.
Walleye cheaters.
It was ready to go. And then I get a call, somebody tried to poach a deer in the middle of the night in Rossford, and it bled out on, some lady's driveway. And so that becomes the story. And then you have to chase that down in the old fashioned, news reporter fashion. And then you just kind of adjust, on the fly. But there still are breaking news stories that I have to, insert here and there. But I am a planner and a long-term planner because, there are so many things that I want to get in the paper and only so much room.
Yeah, that's not really our deal. We did have two, and actually, ironically, within about the last year, we had one of my really close friends caught that one of the biggest smallmouth ever caught, like top three all time, and I was literally there for that. And then obviously the cheater scandal, and we did those what producer do within 24 hours of it happening.
Yeah, I think we were on Sunday, and that happened on Friday, right? I think so. Something like that.
I think we had it up because we did it like the next day or whatever. Yeah, that's not really our deal per se. But again, we're learning, with this stuff. Like I'm a fishing guy that we're just happen to be doing some media stuff because I think people like hearing about this stuff, and it's totally different. The one thing that I could tell you that probably nobody cares, and maybe that's why I don't do it as much, is I wish some of the people that I worked with would allow me to do more perspective pieces. Because there's things that I come across all the time, and I think guys sometimes think of me as the hard ass or the jokester or the fish catching guy, and it's like you see a lot of neat things, and sometimes you get not really serious, but just looking at things a different way. As you get older, you see things differently, and as I work into more of a mentoring relationship on some of the pro staffs, with some of the newer guys, whether they're young or old, doesn't matter. And, I think those things are important. It's kind of like old Jim Foffrich, who I know you've seen through the column there. Like he told me things that are now clicking in. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
What are you talking about? And now, like one of his famous ones is he used to tell me daily, son, I hope I live long enough to see you just enjoy a day on the lake. Because, back then I was just trying to earn my keep. I was the young kid. I was trying to justify my existence. And, when you're in your, it was in my teens and early 20s there, you're like, Jim, what the hell are you talking about? Like now I understand that statement. And I tell that to people like I'm the old guy, and, they don't often understand that, but I'm sure you can appreciate that. And
yeah, absolutely.
I think sometimes we're missing the perspective pieces that you do. Like, again, even if I don't care about the topic, or even, I hate to say it, the person, right? Like, I don't know this, I can't relate to them. I think I can relate to the situation or to somebody that's just offering that up. And I think that's one thing that it's good that like outdoor writers like yourself are doing, because you just don't see that anymore. Like I said, I'm putting my foot in my mouth because of the people that, help provide for my, put food on the table. But when 7 great walleye lures, the 5 best new ice fishing lures, and it's just like, oh, but
yeah,
we're in a clickbait world.
Yeah, you serve a multitude of masters, and I'm sure that's the same way with you. Is that they want a certain product a certain way, and I'm very fortunate and also appreciative of the fact with the Blade is that they give me a ton of latitude. I've never had, in the 12 years I've been in this job, never had an editor or manager come to me and say, "Don't do that. Don't write about that."
Not even Frank.
Well,
Not even Frank.
Frank.
Oh, I know who Frank is.
Frank Corso, he was the sports editor for a while.
He was a sports editor. Frank gave me great latitude as well. It's just as long as I had my stuff in on time, he thought it was great. And so, and he wasn't an outdoors guy, but he had an appreciation for the fact that many readers of the Blade are, and many readers that read the Blade expect an outdoors perspective or an outdoors column, several times a week. It's become part of the Blade, like the peach section and, different quirky things that newspapers have. And so, I feel very blessed, Ross, that they haven't said, well, you need to do more about this, or you need to do less about this, because I've written some things that were loosely connected to the outdoors. I mean, there was a column I wrote a number of years ago about gun control. And it was because Bob Costas had come on an NFL broadcast and went into a long, diatribe about guns. And a lot of what he said was inaccurate. And so I wrote a column about how inaccurate that was, and how when you talk about guns, it not only affects hunters and fishermen and it affects homeowners who maybe have a firearm to protect themselves. And then, some people will write in and it'll be the old, shut up and just write about fishing, But I've written a number of pieces that have kind of touched a nerve, I think, in other areas, and they were more perspective of my personal feelings. I remember when, the guys in the NFL decided they wanted to kneel during the national anthem. I wrote a column about that appeared in the Outdoors, and I said, as the outdoors writer, I've met a ton of veterans that are hunters and fishermen and conservationists and all. And these people are being, disrespected by Colin Kaepernick deciding that he was just going to kneel during the national anthem. And it appeared, in the outdoors section with my picture and the Outdoors logo over top. But it was very loosely connected to the outdoors, but there was some connection. And the Blade has allowed me to do that. And I'm very appreciative of that, because just like you, I'm interested in fishing and hunting, but that's not all I think about. I pay attention to what's going on with Israel and Hamas, and I pay attention to the economy and politics and so on, as I'm sure you do. So we think about these, we have opinions about these things as well. Besides the 8 best walleye fishing lures, I'm sure you have an opinion on those things as well.
Well, I mean, to me, it's really simple. I think if you have people behind the scenes, Outdoor Magazine 1, 2, 3, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream. I'm not even going to use names because I work for most of those. I'm not going to get my wiener in too much of a meat grinder. But I can tell you that the magazines that have the best, like there's all kinds of people that have the Matt Markeys or the Hemingways or the Bob McNallys or whoever that they all contract out, right? So like In Fisherman Magazine's got 20 writers that they work with on a regular basis. But really the heroes of that, in my opinion, are the editors behind the scene, because I am certainly no Hemingway, but I can organize thoughts and I have insight that, maybe you don't because you're in your cube, right? Like I'm out there and I'm seeing it. So a guy like you helps polish that up. So, Joe Schmo sees that and maybe we get rid of some grammar and stuff. But because of that, there's very few editors that I've worked with that I think get it. And the ones that do, that allow me, it shows, I think, ultimately to the customer. And I think that, the final product, whatever you want to call it, the reader, because as an example, most of the magazines I've worked with, I have an article in their top 5 all time. Not because I'm an amazing writer, but because I have a topic that I think the general public was interested in, that most outdoor writers or don't have that insight, or they had an editor that wouldn't let that fly. Exactly. I can remember getting shot down about this is like 15, 20 years ago, about a health, I can't remember exactly the whole premise of it, but it was more of one of those like, hey, fishing is difficult when you do it 200 days in a row type of thing. So here's some health things, and this was like, it was like nutrition before what we know is nutrition now, hydration, just basic kind of simple things. And I can remember several, to this point, I still buddies with these guys. I mean, they didn't shoot it down. I mean, they were dicks. And now all of a sudden, like Al Linder's son, Troy, had a whole column and I can remember telling the one guy, I was like, hey, that seemed to work out pretty well. Too bad you guys could have had that opportunity, right. Because now all of a sudden we look at things differently. And I think it's just like, again, we're talking about fishing, but this is a life thing where anything you get involved with, the people that have some of those outside the box ideas, there's that timing of too soon or already got taken by somebody. You know what I mean? You almost have to be at the cusp of before everybody else did it, so you don't look like a follower, but yet not too early, because sometimes people just aren't ready for things.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for the editors that I've had over the years. A lot of times for things that they did, and a lot of times for things that they didn't do. They left things alone and trusted my gut or my judgment, and it makes a difference. But I've had a couple that were overly aggressive at times, and change the meaning or the context of what I intended to write. The most glaring example, maybe 8-10 years ago, I did a story on, the walleye run is in full swing. I go through the parking lots and I'm keeping track of the license plates, and I see Tennessee and Kentucky and Iowa, and I'm writing about how people from all over the Midwest in a wide perspective are coming to the Maumee River to fish for walleye in April. Isn't this crazy? And the story went in. They had a nice photo, of people lined up, like soldiers in, some kind of revolutionary battle, shoulder to shoulder. And then
that's not what it is.
Yeah. And then the main headline was okay, but there's usually like a teaser or a tagline above that. And it said, hoping to snag a walleye. And,
yeah, I even know that's bad.
Yeah. And
wrong crowd.
I went in and said, that's not only a bad headline, that's a terrible headline. And here's
that's
why.
an illegal byline.
But like you said, it's their lack of familiarity with what we know and what we write about. And so since then, and I didn't beat them up too badly because I understood they just didn't know. That's a cool term. We'll throw that in there. I said, no, then if that was the case, then all those people would get fined and some of them might go to jail. And so since then, there's been more of a hands off, and I'll get a cell phone call at, 9:45 at night. Hey, I was thinking about this. Is this okay? I was thinking about doing this on a cut line or a headline or something. And I think it's a professional courtesy, but I also think it's something that you or myself or Steve Pollock is due, because we have a certain bank of knowledge about the intricacies of these topics. And the folks that are looking at our copy and maybe laying out the page or the magazine or whatever, they don't have that. And so if Ross uses a certain term, a bottom bouncer could mean one thing in a fishing context, and it could mean a whole different thing in a nightclub context. And so,
whoa, that got naughty quick.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I mean. The term could scare them, but we understand what it means.
And you would know who it is. There's a really well-known outdoor editor for a very long time, more in print, not papers. And I started calling him Bread. And I never told, he still doesn't know why, but all the other guys that were writers and stuff like, dude, why you call him Bread? Like, man, you don't want to mess with that guy. And I'm like, I don't care. And the joke was, I said, because he takes all the meat out of everything. Like, to your point, you would read something, you're like, I gave you like insight, like stuff that you'd have to be really in the know to know, that
right.
This is an advantage over A, B, and C. And he would always take that out and just leave the vanilla. And so I started calling him Bread, and it caught on. And I think he thinks it's some type of compliment, but coming from me, he should probably know better. But I mean, so again, with what I kind of do, and I'm only trying to relate to kind of understand and bounce those things back and forth, because the paper world is totally different than like what I do with
Right.
magazines, but in the same way, for the same reasons, that the revenue is down, the readers are down because of this quick and dirty thing that we already beat into the ground. But a short story that I tell people all the time, like if you fished with me, you probably have heard this story, where we're out in the boat and my phone's ringing, and I just literally told a guy, one of my other guys running a boat, who's like 200 yards away, like, hey, I'll call you in a minute and get you, some info here, what we're doing, because we're catching them good. And my client, I said, hey, answer the phone, put it on speaker. Well, it happened to be somebody from Alberta, Canada. And so accidentally answered the phone, kind of SOL here. And as it turns out, fast forward in the story, this guy was on the shitter in deer camp in Canada. And he said, hey, man, I don't really know you or anything, but can you tell me about this Spoon article? And I'm reading through, because again, I don't write as much as you do, but enough. And I'm like, man, I don't remember a Spoon article. And the guy flips it. I said, well, it's Walleye Insider. He flips it over. And I'd be lying if I told you the date, but it was like 10 or 12 years prior that this magazine, I'm assuming from the States, had made it up to a deer camp, was left in a bathroom on a stack of deals. And so, it's like that pass around rate. I think it used to be 7, like every newspaper, they said, figures 7 people read that, whether it's the barber shop or the diner or whatever, or a household of 4. And I think people still kind of forget that, because there's a lot of people I know that want to put that in their hand, and the Kindle thing is maybe catching on or whatever, but there's still that whole put it in your hand, read it later, maybe more of a magazine than a newspaper, because that is a little more time sensitive. But I don't know. Is that just like an old school thought, or you still feel that way too?
No, I still feel that way. There's a pretty clear line, I think, and it's right at about maybe 45 or 50 years old, where people insist on wanting to hold the newspaper in their hand. They want to fold it up. They want to set it down. They want to pick it up. They want to have that flexibility and that comfort level that the paper's here, my cup of coffee is here, and everything's right in the world. And then I pay really close attention to the way people read when I'm in a airport or a restaurant or whatever. How are they reading? How are they getting their news? And unfortunately, from my perspective, Ross, a lot of folks are getting their news in 2 paragraphs on the screen of their telephone, their cell phone, and you just can't get into the kind of depth that we want to get into, or that we need to get into in some of these topics in 2 or 3 paragraphs. You can't do that. So I wish there was more folks that want to read the newspaper the traditional way and want to read magazines. I still, get magazines and like to read them that way. I don't read things on my phone, much at all. And even on the laptop, I'm not that comfortable trying to read the newspaper on my laptop. I want to hold it, I want to have it. I want to lay it down, pick it up, and so on. And there's
so much clickbait where things aren't even related to the deal. Right. And I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole of, it's not necessarily, I don't think the format as much for me anymore, is more of like the qualifying who's actually writing this, because the credibility, which again, that's a whole different podcast. Like producer dude's going to steer me right away from that, going on a rant. But, again, it's rather I'm listening to Matt Markey on my Kindle or a podcast here through YouTube, like we're going to be doing, or, Field and Stream magazine or something.
Right.
I like, you trust Matt Markey, like, that voice, that person, kind of like we used to have with the newscasters, and now all of a sudden there's just this thing of just used to, and it's, the things that are different. Producer dude, do you agree with the credibility thing? Because he has worked with an awful lot of these guys. And did you see that when you worked with the guys rotating through versus somebody that like was the sports guy for 10 years or something?
Sure. I mean, if you've been there, you pretty much have some instant credibility, right? If you've been there for any period of time. A lot of the stuff online now is not even written by people. I mean, honestly, it's just AI. You're writing, they're just generating articles based on information. So you really have to look and see if it's correct and verify everything.
Interesting. And then there's also some purposeful misinformation, right? Hashtag fake news, but we'll move on from that. But I'm sure that has to be one of the biggest nightmares that you deal with, though, as far as maybe you less than someone else at the Blade, but the fake news thing, like that hashtag or that reality, because of, unfortunately, again, no different than law enforcement or anything else, one bad apple out of 100, and all of a sudden you're labeled in with that.
It is.
Dealt with that.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And even though I write, in the outdoors realm, I read the entire newspaper and I pay attention to the news and so on. And what I've seen is not only the kind of the slow deterioration of credibility, because so many different voices or sources are out there and you don't know which ones are reliable and which ones are not. A lot of people don't know. But I also see the sin of omission has become a big concern for me, where, if a certain news organization doesn't like the direction of a story or the facts and so on, they just don't report it. And so it's like it never happened. It didn't happen because
I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything.
Right. It just didn't happen. And that I see that more and more. And even in, I get the New York Times and I read it, even though I don't agree with their editorial policy and a lot of times their reporting style. And I'll notice that there are some what I consider fairly major national, international news stories, and they will either not report them or they'll be buried on page 22 where, it's right above the Macy's ad and a lot of people won't see it. So, I'm not real proud of my profession right now. I mean, it was different when I started out. I'm one of those kids that I think went into journalism because of, All the President's Men and that, great job of reporting that basically changed history and how important the news media was. And it's, we don't have any more, credible like Walter Cronkites or anything like that, nationally. I think locally, somebody like Lee Conklin on Channel 13, he's been around a long time. He's very honest. He's very professional. He's very good at what he does. So people are comfortable with news delivered by somebody like that. And I think they develop the same level of comfort with, writers or reporters. And I believe and I hope that over the years, the last 12 years, people have developed that, with me. And I probably get maybe 20 or 25 emails on a Sunday evening or a Monday about the Sunday column or the Sunday story. And a lot of times a dozen of those are the same people. And they follow you and they trust you and they're interested in your perspective or what you have to say. And that's nice, but it's also, I feel, an obligation to them to, make it honest, make it fair, make it balanced, make it, keep the variety there, keep it interesting and all. And it's an obligation that I kind of start the day with each day. So today I'll work on my Sunday column, and that'll be in the front of my mind is that I want to relate this story. And I want to be fair to the people I'm writing about, but also be fair and honest with those who are going to read it and don't really know that much about the subject.
So does somebody that would be like a reasonable person, if you want to call it that, with these emails, because I'm sure you get non-reasonable emails, but does some of those people, because I think the reason I ask this, because I feel it's true with myself, maybe help give you a different perspective on your own even topic or ideas, because somebody else is just looking at this just from a different walk of life?
Absolutely. And I get that a lot of times from people who I think now when you write for, specialty magazines, whether it's Outdoor Life or In Fisherman or whatever, you're pretty certain that the people who are reading that have the basic knowledge of the subject, whether it's
not anymore, but I know what you mean.
Okay. You could operate with that assumption. I have to caution myself that if I'm writing about, hunting or fishing, I can't assume that the person knows if I say, it's the jig bite is really good. I can't assume that the reader knows exactly what I'm talking about. So you have to have an explanatory graph or so to make sure you're bringing in the other people who don't know what that is. And I've really been cognizant of that, especially writing about hunting and about deer hunting, because deer hunting is one of those red flag things that I still don't fully understand why a certain percentage of the population and the readership go off the deep end when it's deer hunting. And I think it's what I call the Disneyfication of deer. It's that people think every deer is Bambi and that deer can talk and they can walk up in your backyard and have a conversation and all like you see on a Disney
cheeseburgers.
Movie. Yeah. And I try to explain to people that that's not the case. These are wild animals. And obviously, if we harvest them, I want to see that used and so on. But a lot of people, hunt deer and harvest deer and feed their family. And, I'm told by biologists over and over that, we have too many deer on the landscape because we've eliminated all of their natural predators. There are no more wolves. There are no more bears. There are no more, mountain lions and so on that used to keep the population in check. We eliminated those because they scared us and they killed our livestock. But now we have these large deer herds, and a lot of them are living in, these big parks or reserves or whatever, where the nutrition is great. So the doe has one fawn the first year, and then the next year she'll probably have twins. And so the population grows exponentially. I said, if we don't hunt, the only other way to mitigate that population is disease or somebody hitting them with a car or a minivan. And we don't want that. I said, hunting is the sole limiting factor on deer populations. And people aren't shooting them and leaving them lie. People are hunting deer, processing it, and they're feeding their families. And there's also a large group of hunters who will go out and they'll put one deer in the freezer, and then the next one or two they donate to a Cherry Street Mission or something like that. So I try to talk to these folks reasonably and say, show me the downside. How is this bad? And it's, I got an email, Ross, last week from a guy who said these deer hunters are no different than Hamas. And this is an educated person who used to be a teacher in this area. And I mean, and I try to be rational and reasonable with them and so on, but I'm not sure you can, at some point.
Do you respond to that email to that guy, or?
I didn't respond to him because this is like nut email number 37 from him. I respond to everybody unless, they go off the deep end or it's all vulgarity and so on, and I get a lot of that. And I respond to most of them, but I don't respond to that because how do you reason with somebody like that? I mean,
producer dude, I want you to jump in on this one. So again, what we do is different, but it's really not. So with us, it's producer dude is on my social media accounts. Like, he can pop up on any of these things, right. And he kind of helps guard me, shall we say, from doing something stupid, because he'll either delete or be like, hey, just so you know, because I'm out fishing and I'll get like a text, right. Hey, just so you know, Bob Smith 3602 said. And you're like, it's insane. And so, as I work with these manufacturers stuff, like Ross, engage with these people, in the social media stuff. And so some of these questions that are, like you said, maybe not crazy, like you're a Bambi killer, right. Screw you, death, die, whatever. But in between where it's like, this is a little outlandish. If I was looking you in the face, I'd probably tell you to kiss my ass type of thing. But I will respond to some of these guys in a diplomatic way that most people don't know that I have. Mm-hmm. And the people literally respond back, Matt, like, man, I was just trying to rile you up, or I was just trying to I can't believe you responded to me. That's cool. Yeah, I just wanted to be a dick. And I'm like, is this really what people are doing with their time now? That is, they're going around to random things. Like, these aren't even generally people that follow us, or we've got a handful that just always, right, producer dude, that just seem to put up these things that you can't even. They must be.
Yeah, I can think of a couple people right now that are on YouTube all the time that's just saying weird stuff. Like, what? You don't even.
And he'll literally text me. He'll be like, we're not even going to give them the justice of putting their names out there because I think that's what they want. But he's like, oh, I already took this down, or do you want me to delete this, or did you see this? Because this guy and it's like unintelligible, not from the standpoint of agreeing or disagreeing, but it's just mumbo jumbo where 400 errors in spelling. Not that I'm Webster here, but it's like, huh? And I just don't understand the mentality of people with that. I don't, because
I think there's a certain level of courage that people have when they can write it in an email. You know, everybody's a tough guy when they can do it anonymously or pseudo-anonymously in an email. But, and I have responded to some of those that I consider like fringe, nutty. But one case that I remember that actually turned out, you know, a woman wrote me an email, again, about deer hunting and how horrible it was and awful it was and terrible. And anybody that does this or promotes this is a terrible person or whatever. And I emailed her back and I said, I appreciate your opinion and I respect it, but I think, you know, you don't have all the information you need to formulate a really, you know, important position on this. You know, why don't we talk about it further? I said, you know, pick a place and I'll meet you, my treat, and we'll sit down and have coffee and talk about it for half an hour. She was shocked, first of all, but we ended up meeting at a Panera somewhere in Toledo and talked for like 45 minutes and became friends. She didn't understand, you know, the issues involved in overpopulation of deer. And then I told her, well, at Wildwood Metro Park, there are so many deer that they've defoliated the first 6 feet of the ground. And so all the birds and small mammals that nest on the ground have nowhere to hide. And so the coyotes and the fox and all have decimated them. And this kind of cascades, you know, a lot of the rare plants that they have there and also at oak openings can't get established because the deer there's so many deer, they're over browsing. And so when I explained more of the science behind it and why we need to have deer hunting to get back to the balance that we took out when we eliminated the predators, she had she was an intelligent person and she had a much better understanding of it. But some of the folks that email me, Ross, I could cite all kinds of biology and science and all, and they would still say, you know, you're a murdering son of a bitch and I hate your guts. I mean, that's just the way they feel.
Well, it's just like, you know, when you do a seminar, you know, I know you don't do a lot of speaking engagements and you just sometimes look at these eyes. I can imagine a teacher would be the same way. Like I have a lot of friends that are, my sister's a teacher and you know, you got 30 kids in a class and, you know, 25 of them are picking daisies and just staring at the ceiling. And if you try to reach one or two, maybe that, like in your scenario with that lady, instead of a them versus us scenario, you know, you're taking the high road and it's like, hey, let's try to educate that maybe 5-10% that we can. Because that's maybe even a role, even though we have different platforms, it's a similar situation. And, you know, I've got friends that are crazy liberal, you know, I'm not, and we're still friends, you know, generally probably because of outdoor pursuits and things. And that's all right. But I think sometimes these people, because we have similar conversations, you know, I have friends, they're, I don't know if I'd say anti-hunters, but they're closer to being anti-hunter than they are accepting of it. How about that?
Right. Yeah.
And I think
I have family members the same way, that, you know, members of my family that are against hunting, but we can have a rational conversation about it. And I have friends that are the same way. And I think that's important, that I'll listen to you, you listen to me. Sure, we don't agree, but we're respectful about it. But you know, some of the emails and the feedback I get, I just see it as a hopeless, you know, black hole. So I don't respond.
Hey Matt, what have you with the walleye cheaters? What kind of response did you get? I mean, you were pretty adamant, pretty opinionated, and have been the whole time with the walleye cheaters. Like, what kind of response did people give you for your stance there?
That story and that set of stories has had more reaction than anything that's ever been published in the Blade, and that's going back, you know, well over 100 years. And I think it's because, number one, it's crime and people love crime. I mean, some of those are leading stories, you know, that postal carrier that got busted for faking that robbery or whatever in Toledo last week. That's the number one story on the website. You know, the guy says he got robbed because all he was trying to do was get a few extra days off. People love crime. And I think people love oddball crime, and cheating in a walleye tournament, you know, qualified as that. And I also think another thing that drew folks in was they had no clue how much money is involved, not only in winning the Lake Erie, walleye trail tournament, but in the brawl and, different walleye tournaments. They had no clue how much money was involved. And so when that initial story ran, within 48 hours, I got calls from radio stations in British Columbia, Sydney, Australia, and the Dan Patrick Show that all wanted me to go on live and talk about the walleye cheaters, because they, it was bizarro world to them. It was a crime that they could never imagine taking place, and the audacity of just throwing, window weights inside a fish and expecting that people to accept that. But also the video obviously sold a lot of it when it looked like
no video, no story.
The angry mob, would lynch those two guys if it hadn't been, for the tournament director intervening. And, the reaction I got was, number one, that people were fascinated by that story. And I wrote probably 6 or 7 follow-ups on additional foibles that these individuals were involved in. I went to Cleveland to cover the arraignment, to cover the sentencing and so on. And the reaction was that people were shocked by the whole thing. And then as they learned more about it, that, well, both of those guys had, domestic violence somewhere on their record, and had other, instances where they had run-ins with the law. It became clear that these probably weren't good dudes. And, they shouldn't have been in the tournament. And, what happened, a lot of people thought, well, the overwhelming reaction was they got off way too easy. That if Ross and Matt go and try to rob a bank and we get caught in the act, we are not going to get 10 days in jail. But they have been essentially tried to rob that tournament and those other competitors of roughly $30,000, and there's a fair preponderance of evidence that this probably happened in prior events. They got 10 days. And so a lot of the reaction nationally and some internationally was, boy, did they ever get off easy? But
yeah, you know what though? Here's the deal, because this is in my wheelhouse, right?
Right.
I don't disagree. Do I think more should have happened to him? Absolutely. But I feel like at least a little bit of a precedent was set, because again, and we'll talk about some of this later. I don't want to go completely down this rabbit hole, but the amount of people that have been caught poaching here, where it's not, I got 2 extra fish, or I decided even to double trip. We're talking about mass amounts of fish, hundreds, 400 smallmouth out of season, intentionally going out to rob the resource. And they get like a $500 fine or something silly, or they take their boat in their truck, but they get it back. So at least in this circumstance, they did take their boat. Yes, it was probably allegedly from winnings that were also fraudulent. Yeah. But again, we've set that precedent, because even like the bass fishing world, the Bassmaster Tour, right? Like that's the Super Bowl. They made adjustments in their tour because of a walleye club in Ohio. Right. So as much as I think it's shitty, because I feel passionate about this, obviously I'm involved with this. My buddies, put the Lake Erie Walleye Trail and that walleye club together 20 some years ago. And so I feel burdened by that too, from a fishing industry standpoint, because people then looked at me that know what I do, or would, through these different things. And they said, hey, this is what happens in walleye tournaments. They just assumed this was status quo, kind of like you had hinted at.
Yeah.
But I still feel like, I didn't learn, I confirmed something, okay? Because I was in an insane amount of press, to the point I started backing out of these things, because originally it was done because sponsors asked me to go represent for certain things where these guys were claiming they were representing companies, which I actually do. And so I was almost a PR guy. My mom still probably can't believe that I was acting as a PR guy as a positive spin either. But, and these things, and I read some of these things afterwards, to your point of what is either put in or misleading. And, they brought these guys on to be the Al Linder, and in publications like the Washington Post, New York Times, all kinds of different places. I think things were misrepresented to the average person that doesn't fish, much like what you said with somebody deer hunting, right, where and again, you can name any of these things because they didn't. How can you even do your due diligence on time when you go to print in 2 hours or whatever it is? I can remember, I think it was the New York Times called me like 11 o'clock at night, and they're like, "We got 30 minutes till we got to get this going. I need some quotes. I need this. I need that."
Right.
And again, I'm not even going to name an individual one, but generally speaking, especially some of them in Europe, where the amount of information they put in there that was just totally not legit from the standpoint of making these guys to be the Michael Jordan of the fishing industry, or that it was $100,000, like numbers that could be easily fact checked. Like you said, roughly 20 something with every bonus, everything.
Right.
I mean, that's like the gravy and everything on top of it. And it was funny because it was actually the BBC, in my opinion, that I personally dealt with, that had the most accurate, that didn't just take my word for it. They said, "We're going to call you back. We're basically going to fact check you too." I said, "Perfect."
Yeah, exactly.
And the guy was like, "So you're not mad?" I'm like, "You should. You don't know me from shit."
Mhm.
Like, and you're just going to put this. And I was kind of surprised by that. And I guess I confirmed that there was a lot of those different media outlets and other ones that I didn't even contribute anything to, that I'm like, man, you guys are just, this is shit journalism.
It is, and I think, Ross, it's the rush to be first. It's no longer the rush to be right or be correct. It's the rush to be first. And I saw a lot of that too, where there were glaring inaccuracies because everybody wanted to jump on the train, right away. And there were a lot of, factual intricacies involved in this that you would understand, and that I would understand, and Pollock would understand, and Bob Barnhart would understand, but a lot of the average folk would have no clue. So this story needed a lot of set dressing or fixing, setting up the scenario so you understood well exactly why this mattered and why did they do it in this fashion. And I had people email me, well, didn't the judges see him put the weights in the fish? I said, no. The field of play is over 100 miles wide. How could the judges see them? I said, they leave the dock. Nobody sees them. They come back. It's a format that people don't understand,
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into the Cheaters podcast because we already did that and we got like 1 million views on it. It was crazy. But the comments on that were the same thing. Where, again, producer dude, I mean, you read more of those comments. I gave up on most of them because they were so ludicrous to a certain point. Like once the fishermen were done with it, and people were like, "Hey, dumb fisherman," like I'm paraphrasing 9,000 comments. "Hey, dumb fisherman."
Oh, that's accurate.
How about you try a metal detector? And it's like, okay, until they put something non-metallic in them, like walleye fillets, or they were using cages. Yeah. Like, I think that, again, we're not going to relive this.
Everybody had a simple answer, right? It was like, "Oh, well, you're stupid. Why didn't you think of this?" Why,
and it's like these guys were using. Allegedly, we're using cages. They had fish, a little bucket holder thing that I helped develop for Ranger boats underneath the console. Literally one of my little deals that I did with them. They were hiding fish behind there, or at least they found scales and all kinds of nasty, fish parts back there. So there was, obviously it was a lot more. The lead in fish is the oldest trick in the book, and it makes a good story in the video, cutting them out, rolling down the parking lot. But there was so many things going on there. And again, like some of the organizations I've worked with, like, "Ross, please don't tell some of the stuff because you're going to educate for future cheaters." Because there are things. Al Linder, when we had him, he said, "Listen, the technology has surpassed the current rules that we have. If you want to be a criminal in today's day and age, it's like football, right? You have to have a really, really good defensive back to outdo these wide receivers, and they keep changing rules to make the field a little more fair, if you will. Right. And it's the same thing with cheating. If you really want to cheat, you're going to be able to do it if you just don't get really silly stupid, which most people do, just like robbing banks. I always say that one of the most notorious bank robbers, somebody has to fact check who this guy was, but they didn't catch him for years, and they finally caught him when his wallet fell out on a sidewalk or something, after like heist number 40 or something. Yeah. So,
and there's a theory out there that I've heard from a number of, tournament fishermen that allegedly these guys got away with it a number of times, and got sloppy, and they got careless and just dropped the lead weights in there, and then they get busted. And I think that's plausible.
Yeah. Hey, we're done with that. However, I think, again, one of the things that's fascinating to me, because as a fishing guide, people always like, hey, so what's the deal with being a fishing guide? And granted, that's a portion of what I do in the fishing business, but it's the one people see probably the most or think about the most. And I think one of the coolest things after, I don't know, about 5,000 days of doing it, 25, 26 years or whatever it's been, is the people. And I think that relates to you, because for me, I have super famous clients, NFL guys. And a lot of times it's not a name to me, because a lot of those people are the biggest a-holes that there are. But sometimes it's just, this group of farmers that I have, producer dudes actually doing some work for now. Coolest, most down-to-earth people. We talk this great stuff. I have a celebrity chef, person, and we don't generally even talk about food with them. My football guys, we don't talk about food. It's a really unique thing, but it's, for me, being able to call somebody like one of my NFL guys and say, hey, can you talk to the training staff? I've got this hurting right now. It's a really diverse thing that I don't think people think about. But that aside from some fun connections and some little fringe benefits, it is getting to know people that are really, really good at a really diverse set of things. Some of the best fishermen that I have had in my boat are people that don't know anything about fishing. And I kind of ask them, like, so what do you do? Because they pick up on it so quickly. Right. And it turns out, they're the CEO of XYZ company that, you definitely would know. But again, I keep those names kind of private. And I'm just like, I know why this guy's the CEO. Like, sometimes these terms and these positions get, negative connotations to them because of whatever. But some of these guys, you're like, man, I know you could be the best. Whatever you do, you would be one of the best at it, because of the way your mindset is and your work ethic and such. And then the people that are like, 5 minutes in, they're not doing anything, you go, what do you do? And it just seems to always make sense. You know what I mean? And
exactly.
So with a positive spin on that, give me some stuff of the people that you've met along the way. Maybe it's not even with the blade, but just as a outdoor communicator. How about that?
Well, you're right. It's the people that make the job fun and make it interesting, and
or shitty sometimes.
Sometimes, and because people are they're quirky, but they're also interesting in their own right. Early on, probably a year after I took over for Pollock, I got an email from a guy who lived up at Devil's Lake in Michigan. He was a retired carryout owner from Toledo, and the guy's name is John Zulke. He had done some charter work on Lake Erie, filling in for different people, so he was a fisherman. And he emailed me about wild turkey hunting, because I hadn't written anything about it to that point. And this was, fairly early on. And so I said, well, why don't you educate me? And so I went up there and sat down with him. And this is a guy who worked like crazy his entire life. If you own one of those carryouts, you're going to work at 5 a.m. and you're going home at 11 most nights. And the key to making money is not have to hire a bunch of people. So he worked really hard. He did really well, bought a place on Devil's Lake, demolished an old cottage, built a beautiful home there. So he's going to hunt and fish in his retirement. So he picked up wild turkey hunting at age 60. That was the first time that he hunted. And by the age of 69, he had a world slam. And in wild turkey hunting, that means that you've taken one of each of the 6 subspecies on the North American continent. So he's gone to Mexico, he's gone to Florida, he's gone to Nebraska, he's got the different subspecies from around here. And he had all these wild turkeys, full body mounts, in a gallery there on the second level of his home. And wow. He had the taxidermy work done by somebody in Kentucky who is supposedly the best around at wild turkeys. These things are stunning. When he passed away, that collection, went to Cabela's. That's how good these were. But anyways, he starts explaining it to me, and I'm thinking, this guy real character, which, enrich our lives all the way. So we're just chatting, and I find out, well, he went to Ohio State. Well, when did you go there? He tells me the year. Well, what'd you do? He goes, well, I went on a golf scholarship, and he was on the same golf team with Jack Nicklaus. And so the story keeps getting better and better. And so, we talk about wild turkey hunting and all. And then I said, well, you're living right here in Devil's Lake. I said, so I'm assuming you're a bass fisherman. He goes, no, I'm a bluegill fisherman. And after talking to people around there, it turned out he was the best bluegill fisherman in the Irish Hills. And so I went fishing with him a few times, and, he was catching a lot of nice bluegill, and he would only keep, 20 or so each time. And I said, what are you doing with all these fish, John? And he said, well, I clean them and I freeze them. And then in Labor Day weekend each year, my church, which is at the other end of the lake, the Catholic parish, they have a fish fry, and I supply all the fish. And I said, you supply all the fish? And he goes, well, some of these other bums might throw a few in here and there, but I supply the majority. And so I went out and looked in his garage in the freezer, and I bet he had, 1,200 bluegill fillets in there for that fall's fish fry. And so my wife and I went to the fish fry that year, and just the whole time I'm getting to know him better. I probably fished with him maybe a dozen times. He passed away last year. He had melanoma that he picked up from all those charter trips on Lake Erie with no sunscreen. Fair-skinned dude, and he fought that for a number of years and so on, and eventually it got him. But we're out fishing, and he's in his 70s at this point, and he says he doesn't feel good. And I said, well, what are you doing this for? And he goes, well, I'm trying to get the fish for the fish fry. I said, let somebody else do that. And he goes, no, I figured the only way I'm ever going to get into heaven is by doing this. And so
interesting. Okay.
When he passed away, I wrote a story about him and what a cool guy he was, and ornery and always crabby and everything, but in a fun way. And I said, that's what he told me. He says, I figured this is the only way I'm going to get into heaven. And so I said, I think he's probably already there, with the number of fish that he caught. But just one of the characters that enrich our lives so much. And we caught a lot of fish together, solved all the world's problems in 3 hours, on Devil's Lake, starting at about 7 o'clock in the morning. But a good guy, went to the DeVilbiss, Toledo guy to his core, but somebody who was just so interesting on so many different levels. And, as a wild turkey hunter, a bluegill fisherman, a, business owner, but he had that attention and intensity to detail that I'm sure he needed in that business. And then he applied that to his turkey hunting and his fishing and so on. And I've seen that, kind of the way you describe those, maybe a CEO in the boat who hasn't been walleye fishing, but in a half an hour, he knows the game. He knows the
Crazy.
game. Yeah. And I think that's, this guy was that same way. And, somebody to pick up, it's a very, very difficult sport because turkeys are so acutely tuned in to their surroundings because everything out there is trying to eat them or kill them. And, for him
Isn't their vision like crazy good?
Unbelievable vision and hearing, and they pick up everything. And so for him to master that sport basically in a decade and accomplish something that 99% of lifelong wild turkey hunters never accomplish, that was indicative of the type of person and character that he was, and everything he did with that, same level of attention to detail and so on. And that's why, he caught enough bluegills to get him into heaven.
Yeah, I just wonder anymore when I see people with fishermen, like obviously it's my living. It's like a good friend of mine in the hunting industry says, yeah, I'm damn serious about my hunting. It's how I feed my family. And it's the same thing for me with the fishing, but I just think people lack passion anymore with stuff. Like for me, it's fishing, but for somebody else, it may be, I don't know, cheerleading camp or something. But
Right.
don't you kind of see this? Like people just kind of give up and just, well, okay.
I think it's that everything is supposed to be easy. And, I've had people call me or email me and say, yeah, we read about all this walleye fishing on Lake Erie. And, we drove up from Cincinnati and we went out there for the whole day and we caught 2 fish. And, like I'm supposed to have some apology or some explanation. I said, yeah. I said, there's some very, very good fishermen that have the same experience. It's not a given. It's just the next day and the one after that, and maybe doing something different the following day to improve your success. But you're right. I don't see that level of passion, that I think should be there. And that's why I think the ranks of, especially on the hunting side, the ranks of hunters has declined significantly in the last 20 years. And it's to the point now where I'm concerned about them being able to sustain, the ODNR, because 97% of the Division of Wildlife comes from licenses. And if you don't have the hunters buying the licenses and the deer permits, you're not going to be able to have the staffing you need. And I think people expect it to be easy. Hunting isn't easy. Walleye fishing isn't easy. It takes a level of commitment and passion and understanding and sacrifice in order to do it and be successful at it over the long term. But a lot of people just, think it should be, this should come easy. And if it doesn't, I give up.
So Matt, where do you see the industry going? I mean, you've been interested and been part of this for a long time. I mean, the outdoor industry, what has changed during your time, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think on the fishing side, I see an upward, move. And I think part of that is that, fly fishing became very sexy and very attractive for a lot of people. So there's a lot more fly fishing. No, not me. A lot more fly fishermen than there were, 20, 25 years ago. And I think I'm not a huge fan of the kind of what I say that like there's like a snob or an elitist level in fly fishing. And I'm not a big fan of that. But I think if it brings more fishermen out, it's good for the whole group and all. And I think we're doing a reasonably good job educating kids and introducing them to fishing, because it's much easier to do than it is to educate them and introduce them to hunting. I'd like to see more of that. It troubles me that I used to work the zoo, Toledo Zoo summer fishing camp, and I'd have, 5th and 6th graders in there. And I have 30 kids, and I'd say, okay, how many of you ever fished before? 2 hands go up. By the time I was that age, and I'm sure Ross was the same way, I was fishing on my own at reservoirs, cleaning my own fish, getting my own bait, and so on. And I'm thinking these kids are missing out, on a lot of really outstanding opportunities. But I think we're doing a little better job of introducing kids to fishing. And I think once you do that, you created a lifelong fisherman in probably half of those, cases and all, because of all that it brings. But I'm concerned overall that people are not enjoying, appreciating, and experiencing the outdoors as much as they should. And it's, we can beat this, thing to death, but so many people are finding their comfort zone with their phone or social media or, electronic companionship, I guess, of some kind. Whereas some of my best experiences and my best memories in my life came with a couple of my brothers in a boat at an outpost camp in Manitoba, or fishing with my father-in-law on the Portage River during the white bass run, and giving 75 fish to a couple guys who were on shore and couldn't catch any. I mean, those are the things that I remember. I don't remember. Boy, last week when I was scrolling on, Twitter, it was really fun. And those things are so empty to me, those experiences. And so I'm, in the big picture, I'm concerned that the current generation and the ones to come, will they have the appreciation, for the outdoors, for hunting and fishing and hiking and camping and wetlands and all that? Will they have the understanding and the appreciation of those things to sustain them, like we should? I don't know. I'm a little bit worried about that. I don't like and this isn't going to make me any friends, but I don't like the Bass Pros and the Cabela's of the world's kind of gobbling up. I used to like to go into a bait shop and see a guy sitting behind the counter with a cigarette and a cup of coffee and bitching about the weather or his wife or something. And, guys in there talking about fishing, and it smelled kind of earthy and all, those places. We have a few of them here along the lake, fortunately, but, there used to be those bait shops in every little town, and now they're gone, and so I am concerned, for the environment, that my grandkids are going to grow up in. I got 4 grandsons, and, I bring them to boot camp here and at our house and try to teach them to fish on the pond. And
boot camp, I like that.
It should be embarrassing for a 15-year-old kid when a nearly 70-year-old man can skip a rock better than you can and can climb a tree better than you can. And so I'm worried about, those kids. And one of the things people I hear from a lot, at the Blade, single moms who want to find somebody to teach their son or their daughter to fish or how to camp or build a fire or pitch a tent or, any of those things, shoot a bow, and they don't have anybody. So in a long kind of wandering, tangent-ridden answer to your question, I am concerned because I think that if kids today grow up and don't experience the same things that we did, they're really getting cheated.
So producer dude's going to kill me on this one too. I'm sure I'm going to get a text message in 5 seconds because he says I get to be a grumpy old man before my time. But like in my boat, I see it where you've got people, we do a lot of trolling, right? Like that's a lot of what goes on out there. So there is time where, we're conversating, and then you get people and it's not, I'm not just going to blame teenagers or 20-year-olds or whatever. Right. I mean, they get 60, 70-year-old people, the same thing. They're buried in their phone. Hey, let me just finish this email. We got 3 fish on. Like, guys, where's your excitement? But even when we're jigging or something and the guy's got a phone in one hand, we've lost many phones over the side and during my guide trips because people are trying to play in their phone and half-ass fish, if you want to call it that. I do get a little pissed, not going to lie to you, because it's like, well, I want to have success too. I want these guys engaged, because if they're not engaged, I'm like, I might as well just not be here. But where I'm going for that is, when I was in college, fishing was that you were a geek or a nerd. Like that was it. Now,
right,
dude, Ohio State has boats. They have a fishing program. These guys are the rock stars. These are the non-quote athletic guys at Ohio State that are, they're bringing pride to the university or whatever. And I just wonder, like, that term fishing for likes, just like, girls get the Instagram things or whatever. And it's like, is that still, in your opinion, positive for fishing? Because they're doing it, but they're probably not doing it for that reason. And if we can't get a good post out of it, we're not going to do it today. That mentality.
I'm not fond of it, but I think anything helps. And to your point, Adrian College in Michigan, the biggest studs on campus are the bass fishing team guys. And that's something that is a phenomenon that's unique there, but we've also seen it grow across the country where collegiate and even high school fishing teams are now a thing. Yeah. They're a thing. They weren't a thing when I was in school, believe me. And they're now a thing. And I think although it's not ideal because it's not for everyone, I think every little bit helps, whether it's, somebody sees that and say, well, I want to learn that, or I want to take part, or what does it take to get on the team? I mean, the coach at Adrian told me that he regularly gets phone calls from kids in California and Texas and Alabama and all that want to come to Adrian, Michigan and be on the bass fishing team. They don't want to come there and be on the football team or the basketball team. They want to be on the bass fishing team. And I think, although it's, one unique example, I think anything that promotes and proliferates the sport is beneficial, even though I don't think you should be fishing for clicks. You should be fishing because you enjoy it. And then it has these ancillary benefits where actually, well, yes, you can bring very good protein to the table and you can have exceptional time. I mean, those from when my dad was alive, Ross, we took fishing trips to Canada for 26 years, my dad and my 5 brothers and I, and occasionally we would bring along a brother-in-law who had passed the test. If they were a wimp, they weren't going. They weren't going.
I was going to say, what is the test? What is the test? Because
if they ever whined, they weren't going. And so some of those times you had no cell phones, no news. You're at an outpost camp. The world could be on fire. You wouldn't know it. And so you're out there, and sure, you're catching walleye and pike and, lakers occasionally, but it's the time you spent with those people. I mean, my brothers are all very successful. A couple of them run companies. There's a movie producer, a commercial real estate guy, and so on. When we get together, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about our stock portfolios or stuff. We talk about those trips. Remember this. Remember when that guy at that other camp was drunk and threw gas on the fire, and then Dad had to take care of him. We always took a doctor along. It was helpful. And remember that time, when this happened, when, we didn't put the guts far enough away and there was a bear in camp. I mean, fishing is about so many other things than what actually ends up on the end of your hook. The camaraderie. Yeah. It's irreplaceable. And so I'm thinking, well, say kids that grow up today, and whether they, young kids or college or whatever, and they go through life and never experience that, they're missing something that is and has enriched my life and yours as well. And I think that's sad and unfortunate. And, there's only so much that I can do by, volunteering at those fish camps. And I've had those single moms call me and, I'll put together a Zebco spinning rod and give it to them and say, here, and, take this and here's what you do, or fix up a little tackle box. But I think, there's only so much of that we can do. The parents, the grandparents have to create that bond, whether it's fishing or whether it's hunting or taking kids. It needs
to be more grassroots.
It does. It absolutely does. And so when I have my, grandsons here for boot camp, I mean, I make them climb a tree. We got an orchard. You're going to go climb a tree. You're going to learn how to do this. Okay, tonight we're going to go out. We're going to build a fire. And they're just standing there dumbfounded, like, build a fire? how does that happen? And so I just think it's,
maybe it's boot camp. I like it.
We had one day where I was having trouble with my 2 older grandsons. They were probably 13 and 15 at the time. And they're here in northern Wood County, out in the country. You got a pond, you got a barn, you got chickens, you got trees, everything. And it's 75 degrees, beautiful day. I get done in my office at home. I go out, 10:30. They're sitting on the couch on their phones or their Game Boys or whatever it was. And I told my wife, okay, tomorrow we're done. I said, tomorrow is officially no device day. I said, no phones, no TV, no Game Boys, no laptops, nothing. And they threw a fit. I mean, they were going to call child services on me. And they called their mom back in Virginia and said, Grandpa's so mean. He's doing this, he's doing that, and so on. And I said, we're going to do it. And so the next day, I got them up and we started out, and they learned how to skip rocks across the pond. They learned how to go get bait out of the compost pile. They learned how to, take a bluegill off the hook. We climbed trees. Later that night, we built a fire. And the next morning was like, okay, what are we doing today? They had never experienced. So these are Army brats. So they lived all over the world. And, but they never experienced any of those things. And I'm concerned about the hundreds of thousands of kids out there in this general area who are probably in the same boat, but they don't have a mean old grandpa to teach them those things.
I've said this in other podcasts, and I don't remember which one it was, but I think that it stands true across all lines. Is I don't know anybody that doesn't like to fish if they have somebody that is remotely in the know that takes them.
Right.
I mean, whether it's a farm pond or Lake Erie, whether it's a bluegill or a salmon. If somebody goes, again, whether it's just getting outside, people that enjoy those things, they don't even know that they like it until they, I don't think they even know what it is that they like it. They just like it. So obviously I do like fishing. I like catching better. No, not going to lie. But as you get older, I 100%, and I'm like as goal oriented as you can get and pretty intense, you could say. The end result is the camaraderie is still, like, to your point, is what I remember more than people are like, well, did you have 19 walleyes today? I'm like, I have no idea.
Right.
My goal is to always know I only have, the legal limit when we go in. Other than that, people always say, how many did you throw? No idea. Don't care. Don't count. I'm not a counter. Don't care. Yeah. I think when you start focusing on those numbers, you're focusing on the wrong shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, way back to the start of our conversation, it's the people, and I met some incredible characters on those Canadian trips, guys running these outpost camps, and, they had great stories to tell, but it's fishing that brings people together. And a lot of times, I've created lifelong friendships that started with talking to a guy, on the bank of the Maumee, or, somebody on a boat ramp up at Catawba or something. And I just think fishing has that particular allure that it brings people can be from very diverse backgrounds together, and we're all equals. When we're out there on the lake, we're all equals. It doesn't matter if you got the fanciest, $150,000 boat, or there's some guy over there, in a little putt-putt with a 35 horse Evinrude. They're going to catch fish. Maybe they'll catch more than you do. I mean, I think there's so many things about fishing, that I think are so valuable. And, for me, my dad loved to fish, but he was a surgeon and had a very high pressure, job. And I think on the water, whether we were fishing at one of his patients' quarries, or we were on the lake, or we were, somewhere off the map in Manitoba where nobody would have ever found us, I think what he liked about it was the solitude, and also the closeness you had with the people who were, there enjoying the moment with you. And, I'm sure you've had days where, you wanted to get to shore and sell your boat and find something else to do, but
I say kick dog and drink angel tears. Yeah.
The good days carry you through those times.
I definitely, when I come home, family and friends know if we had a good day or a bad day, because I still give a shit, but again, what is a successful day? I think that definition has changed through the years. Mm-hmm. And partially because of being a little more careful on who we have in the boat, filtering that crowd a little bit because we can.
Right.
So there's no doubt. Now, it is as lovely as this has been, I got to do a hard right on you. We got to finish with, because again, I think you said people love crime and drama. I think that was your.
Well, they do.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing, because I don't think we've talked about this throughout, just little bits and pieces, because I actually got drug into the middle of it a little bit because A, I was there when it actually went down, but then B, you asked me for a quote because I'd shoot you straight and had some insight on this, and then all of a sudden people started trying to attack me, and that's that big Wisconsin poacher ring story. So you wrote a story about that. You walk these people through, and then I'll kind of interject some of the stuff that I saw is from in the field, if you will.
Well, this was during, and stop me at any point, Ross, if I don't have the details 100% accurate, because it's been a while. This was during the spring walleye bonanza on Lake Erie, where the Western Basin is loaded with fish. They're very cooperative. And if the weather is just reasonable, then even the worst fisherman in the world can go out there and get a limit in a short period of time. It's incredible fishing time. Well, there was a group of fishermen from Wisconsin who had come to Lake Erie every spring to take advantage of this. And in this particular instance, the Division of Wildlife law enforcement folks had kind of staked out an area because they got a tip that people who lived near there were seeing the same boats launching repeatedly during the day. And so, to folks that aren't familiar with that, what they were doing is going out at the crack of dawn, quickly getting a daily limit of fish, coming in, taking those fish back to their camp and freezing them, cleaning them, whatever they were doing, going back out, getting another limit of fish, and then sometimes doing the same thing, 3 times in a day, but often at least twice in a day. And so they were breaking.
So let me interject one thing on this. So aside from just like me and you going out in my boat 3 times or something,
right.
Allegedly what was happening was they had booked multiple lodging places. So they would switch clothes, and maybe we took Matt's truck in the afternoon and Ross's boat. And again, that's where I think where it comes in. It's not just like somebody says, hey man, the bite's really good, we're going to keep some extra fish. Not that I'm condoning that, but this was like super premeditated. I mean, crazy premeditation.
It was a criminal enterprise because of the way it was structured and the number of people that were involved, and everybody had to be in on the game at the same level. And there had to be people who were very specialized in how to clean and chunk these fish so they weren't identifiable as to how many you had. And so this went on, they get busted, and it's very clear. The evidence, I'm sure you can recall more the detail, the evidence was overwhelming. How many fish they had, and how many licensed fishermen they had, and the number of days.
A bathtub full of fillets.
Yeah, the math.
They filled the bathtub with fillets over the top of like what we're going to call a standard bathtub, and that was in addition to the freezers that they had running on generators. And I mean, and then another thing that I don't know if you remember, but I know that from some of the people, because I literally was there when the actual bust took place, totally by chance. These guys were running back out in the lake, and I'm like, and again, rather they were other people that weren't even involved, because when you have groups come from a certain area, just that same camaraderie thing. Unfortunately, a little criminal here. They were people dumping coolers of frozen fish to try to get rid of some of the evidence out in the lake.
Right. Yeah, that's
because they were calling people once when they were hauling, because there was multiple boats involved. So when they had some people at the dock and said, hey, boom, the bust is going down, they were texting and calling other people, telling them, hey, get rid of the fish. So
not only did they rape the resource, they actually wasted a lot of it in those kind of measures to try to cover up, their ill deeds here. And so when they get busted, I didn't want to just write another poaching story, because to me, this wasn't just another case of a couple guys overbagged a little bit, or like you said, they took a few extra fish because things were going well. This was a calculated criminal enterprise. And it also irritates me more when people think they can come from another state. Well, Ohio's got a lot of fish, we'll just go take a bunch from there. I would never dream of doing that anywhere, first of all, but to go someplace else. Wisconsin has a lot of walleye. Catch your own fish if that's the way you want to approach it. But that irritated me. But then once I saw the depth of this particular enterprise and how much they had poached and how sophisticated it was, I wrote a bigger story about it. And I had to pry the names and the hometowns out of the Division of Wildlife, because they hadn't all been prosecuted yet. And just to say these people were charged. And so I had their names and their hometowns, and then the Milwaukee paper picked up our story. And so a lot of these guys who maybe were strutting around back in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, I'm the biggest, baddest walleye fisherman here. Well, the light all of a sudden was on them. Well, you're also a poaching dirtbag. And so they were extremely angry. And I got calls from a couple of them, and from one guy's wife who said I ruined his life by writing that story. And I said, no, I didn't. He did. If his life is ruined, it was of his doing. All I did was report what took place. And so that case illustrated for me how poaching is a much more serious problem than people realize in Ohio. On Lake Erie, deer poaching is unbelievable. Poaching of, rare amphibians and reptiles is a thing here that people would never, fully understand. But also how people aren't doing this because, I lost my job and my wife and kids are starving. No, they're doing it because they're greedy pieces of crap that want to come, take such advantage of this incredible resource we have. And those fish belong to everybody, that lives here, whether you're a fisherman or not. Our natural resources, whether it's wildlife or minerals, they belong to all of us. And so that theft that those guys tried to perpetrate was not only against Ross Robertson and Matt Markey, it was against, an 80-year-old woman who's living out in Monclova that doesn't even know about it, because that resource belongs to all of us. So I think every time one of these poaching cases comes up, I try to put as big a light as possible on it to, if these people have no values, maybe we can shame them as much as possible. And
because our judicial system locally doesn't seem to feel that it's as big of a problem, because they're like, well, they're coming here and they're getting eating hotels and, booking stuff. And
some of the judges that I've spoken with almost seem like these wildlife cases are an annoyance. I'm dealing with robberies and I'm dealing with, child abuse and so on. Why are you bringing this in? This guy caught too many fish. Well, I think the punishments need to be more severe, both in time and monetarily, because, they've gotten a little better on the deer side, where now they're putting a value on the rack and that particular buck that you poached. And it gets into the thousands of dollars, which it should be. But I also think the fines for poaching on Lake Erie, walleye that's our reserve. That's our cash, our bank account, the walleye in Lake Erie. So if somebody steals from that, I think the punishment should be more severe. And
100%.
And anything I can do to bang on that drum, I'm going to do it every time, whether you run these, I asked for pictures of these guys. They didn't have them. I would have run their mug shots, with this story about these walleye poachers, because these weren't, like we said, these weren't average guys that maybe just had a bad day and they kept a few extra fish. This was a criminal operation.
Let me tell you one thing here is the perception on Lake Erie. And I think even a lot of our local organizations do not help us out because of the tourism and dollar bills, like everything else. The Maumee River situation, all that. I mean, it's known snagging a lot of that. I understand to a certain point, but I feel like some of those people, and I've been very vocal, and it's generally not well received by at least people that are being vocal about it. Privately, I think that it's much like politics. People are like, yeah, man, keep going. I'm like, where's everybody else? Why do I always have to be a mouthpiece of this? And I tell them, this is the deal. I've been to so many different fisheries traveling with my job through the years and seen these places that are, quote, the walleye factory to this, and they're shit now.
Right.
And granted, we have more fish, but the analogy I always use for somebody listening to this to hopefully make this as a different perspective to think about. How many people win the lottery? They make whatever it is, $50,000 a year, $30,000, it doesn't matter. And they get millions of dollars. Maybe they make $100,000 a year or more. It doesn't matter. They get millions of dollars with the lottery, and those numbers are like 70% are broke within 2 years. File bankruptcy, worse off than they were to begin with. And I think that's the same thing here. We have so many fish right now, and our system is so healthy. I can still remember in my lifetime where it wasn't, and not in my adult life, but the Cuyahoga River situation where, the Jim Foffers, the legend of all legends on Lake Erie, in my personal mind, told me about going out fishing dark to dark to catch 2 or 3 walleyes and, a bucket full of white bass. And we are not that that many bad hatches or some type of, nature's event from that being, again, maybe it's the Asian carp or whatever it is. And the mentality is, and I think I know I told you this, but this is, like you said, this has been quite a few years ago. The thing to me that just said, man, we have a problem is when I was literally there, they came in and they had like the sheriff, I think it was, help block the ramp. Because nobody's getting in or out type of deal. And so we're all kind of stuck there. We got boats lined up like it's a parade or something. And one of the guys they had there that I literally overheard, because I was literally feet away from him. And one of the DNR officers, the investigator, said to him, you don't have to answer this, but I'm just kind of curious. We got you on camera. Why didn't you buy a license? You've been here for 2 weeks or whatever it was. And the guy, literally, his response was, I've been coming here for 30 years. I've only gotten one ticket for not having a license. I'm way ahead of the game in, fiscally, obviously.
Right.
And I can remember the officer looking at him and said, well, that's going to change today.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not even steep enough. Like you said, it's kind of like the walleye cheater thing we talked about a little while ago. Has that, if you were to do that same thing at First Federal Bank, you'd be wearing cuffs and an orange jumpsuit for a while.
Exactly.
And I don't know that's, but again, I think with the fishing thing, it is the mentality, because it's my job. I'm passionate about it. The same for you. But for these other people, it's just a hobby. And well, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I don't think then those same people realize that it is a $1 billion industry. Fishing is 9 times larger than the golf industry. And when that goes bad, hotels, food, gas stations, they are going to drastically suffer. Like where I'm at in Port Clinton, without fishing, that's a bad deal there.
Right. Once you lose that foundation, the problems just cascade all through the economy, and the dominoes fall in a hurry. And I think you're right. We can certainly enjoy and celebrate our walleye fishery, but I think we also have to be very astute guardians of that fishery, because things can change. It's a very big lake. You have multiple, governments involved in the administration of that lake, but, one calamity can change things in a hurry. And so we have to be more protective of it. I think, we're doing a good job as far as trying to keep up on the environmental side of it. But, the fish don't last forever. And we're on a really hot streak right now as far as the hatches go. It looks good, but
until it's not.
It's not. So it's just like your investments. When the market's great, things are really going well, but we know that it's probably going to go the other way at some point. And I'm old enough to remember when taking the boat out to West Sister Island, all I saw was a green curtain coming off the bow, and if we caught a couple of walleye, we were thrilled. We were thrilled. That was in the 70s, but it's not that long ago, really, in the big picture. And we have to be better guardians of of what
stewards
we have,
of the sport, because
it's no exaggeration or embellishment. We have the greatest walleye fishery in the world, and if we should protect that by every means that we can.
I think that when you said about shaming them, it almost seems like the option right now, because the judicial system, and like you said, some of the judges that don't put as much seriousness behind it and don't maybe help out our law enforcement guys.
Yeah.
Maybe the shame is the deal, because in this case, again, you correct me because I know you were more detailed with the behind the scenes. Many of those people that were charged with this worked at a penitentiary or some type of jail.
Yeah, they worked together and kind of concocted this together. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And several of them lost their job because of it, because of public opinion and because of their so-called role with basically upholding the law.
Right.
So
if we can't have a public square and put people in stocks anymore. So we can't do that.
Are you sure?
But shaming them is, I think, is the best tool we have right now. And that's names and faces and detailing, everything they did. And my hope is that, well, like with that Rossford case that I cited, my hope is that they eventually catch that poacher that tried to take that trophy deer with a crossbow at 4 a.m. in somebody's front yard, and then heard a noise or a light went on, and so they split and the deer bled out, there on the pavement. I hope they catch that person, and I will run their name and their photo and as much else as I can get about them, because, they were stealing from you and me and everybody else when they tried to poach that deer, and then they wasted the resource, in the commission of that crime. And I just don't think the penalties, whether it's a fine or a few days in jail, are enough. And Ross, one thing I experienced, and I know we don't want to, labor on the thing about the walleye cheaters, but I talked to the district attorney in Cuyahoga County, several times during that case. they were annoyed that they had to handle that case. And they said, basically off the record, we got rapists and murderers and bank robbers here. You know, why are we screwing around with this walleye thing? It's a couple
I heard behind the scenes it was an election year and also the public perception, because there were so many people that were pushing that, or 100% this is not where it's at. And so people would have been really upset then if they thought that the end result wasn't what they wanted.
Right. Yeah. So it was, we have to do a better job of educating the judiciary and, you know, the legal side and so on about the importance of these resources, whether it's deer or fish or what it is. I mean, people, you know, steal things that, you know, we can't even imagine have value, but we need to educate the judicial and the legal side more so that they understand the penalties need to be more severe and they need to pursue them more aggressively.
Interesting stuff. Me and you could talk about these things all day long. I think what we've done is we've guaranteed ourselves a part 2 or 3. This may even have to be a 2-part deal. Producer dude's probably just editing nightmare how he's going to cut this up or whatever. But just make us a promise that you'll come back and jot some notes down of some future stories, because I know we haven't even tapped like a quarter of what we could potentially talk about for sure.
Absolutely. I'd like to do that again. And, you know, there are a lot more things that, you know, that we can talk about. And so, you know, I appreciate the opportunity. This is a avenue that I don't often get to use. And so anytime you want to do it, just let me know.
I look forward to the next episode, as they say. So thanks, Matt, for joining us. Thank you for watching the Bigwater podcast. I'm Ross Robertson. Bigwater fishing is our game. We're on... Producer dude, I may need help because we do this enough.
We've done this enough. You should not need help.
I should not need help, but yet here we are. So we are on Facebook. We are on Instagram at Bigwater Fishing, same as YouTube. We are on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, Amazon.
You got
get them?
Yeah, you got them.
Basically, if you Google Bigwater, one word, fishing another, podcast, or fishing or something, and you can't find us, you probably suck at fishing, because if you can't find us, you're definitely not going to find a walleye. Maybe a bass because they're dumb and easy. But in all seriousness, thanks for tuning in. Matt, thank you for your time. Until the next episode.